A simple elderly woman kicked out of an art gallery, and her rich son makes everyone regret it. Eleanor Williams stood at her kitchen window, watching the New England autumn leaves dance across her modest backyard. Steam rose from her cup of Earl Grey tea as she reviewed the museum brochure one more time. After 40 years of teaching art in the local high school, inspiring generations of students, Eleanor still felt the same flutter of excitement when preparing to see great works in person. The Richard Holden retrospective at the Cavendish Gallery in New York had been on her calendar for months. She had followed Holden's career since his early days, recognizing his genius before most critics had caught on. His use of light and texture had informed her teaching for decades. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you, Mom?" her daughter-in-law Sophia asked, setting down a small suitcase by the door. "Michael feels terrible that he can't take you himself." "Nonsense," Eleanor waved dismissively. "My son is securing that enormous contract in California. That's far more important. Besides, I've been taking the train to New York since before you were born." Eleanor looked at the framed photograph on her mantel. Michael at his college graduation, arms around his proud parents. Robert, her husband, had been gone for 5 years now, but she could still hear his voice encouraging her independence. "I've got my comfortable shoes, my sketchbook, and my reservation at the Whitfield. I'll be just fine." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with anticipation. "This is Holden we're talking about. I wouldn't miss it for the world." What Eleanor didn't say was how much this trip meant to her. Art had been her refuge during Robert's long illness, and now it was her connection to a world beyond her increasingly quiet life. In her well-worn blazer and practical shoes, she might not look like the typical Cavendish Gallery patron, but few would match her appreciation for what hung on those walls. As the taxi pulled away with Sophia waving from the porch, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. Tomorrow, she would stand before Holden's masterpieces, the closest thing to magic she had ever known in this beautifully ordinary world. The Cavendish Gallery stood like a temple of modernity amid the historic buildings of Manhattan's Upper East Side. Its glass facade reflected the clear October sky as Eleanor approached, clutching her pre-purchased ticket. She had dressed in her finest clothes, a navy blue dress she reserved for special occasions, sensible but polished shoes, and a silk scarf Robert had given her for their 40th anniversary. Inside, the gallery buzzed with the particular energy of the New York art scene. Young professionals in designer clothes mingled with older patrons draped in obvious wealth. Eleanor moved carefully through the space, taking time to absorb each piece, occasionally making small notes in her worn sketchbook. "Remarkable use of perspective here," she whispered to herself, leaning slightly closer to examine the brushwork of Holden's Autumn Corridor. Unlike many visitors who posed briefly before each work for social media, Eleanor stood in contemplative silence, sometimes for 15 minutes, before a single painting. As the gallery grew more crowded, Eleanor found herself before Holden's masterpiece, Luminescence. The painting had brought her to tears when she first saw it in a catalog decades ago. Now, standing before it, she felt her eyes moisten as she recognized techniques she had struggled to explain to students for years. Lost in admiration, she didn't notice the young gallery assistant approaching until he cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a rehearsed politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "Would you mind stepping back from the artwork?" Eleanor blinked, realizing she had drifted closer than the recommended distance, though still well behind the security line on the floor. "I'm so sorry," she said, taking a step back. "I was caught up in the moment." The assistant, whose name badge read Preston, gave her a tight smile. "Also, we ask that visitors refrain from taking notes in the gallery." Eleanor glanced down at her small sketchbook. Oh, I've been an art teacher for 40 years. I'm just making observations on technique for my gallery policy, Preston interrupted, his gaze drifting over her shoulder toward a group of well-dressed women entering the room. You can check your items at the front desk. Eleanor nodded and closed her sketchbook, tucking it into her handbag. She continued her tour, now more conscious of the looks she received from staff and some patrons, evaluative glances at her sensible shoes and department store dress. Later, as she sat on a bench to rest her arthritic knee, she overheard Preston speaking to a security guard. The donation gala crowd comes in at 4. Make sure the main hall is appropriately curated. His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Eleanor. Moments later, the security guard approached. "Ma'am, this seating is reserved for members. I'll have to ask you to continue moving through the exhibition or exit. I just need a moment to rest my knee," Eleanor explained. "I've paid for my ticket like everyone else." The guard's expression hardened. "Ms. Cavendish has guests arriving soon. We need to maintain a certain atmosphere." Before Eleanor could respond, Preston appeared at the guard's side. "Is there a problem?" he asked, not looking at Eleanor but rather at a small cluster of stylish patrons who had paused to observe the interaction. "No problem," Eleanor said, rising with as much dignity as she could muster. "I was just leaving." "Let me assist you to the exit," Preston said, taking her elbow in a grip firm enough to communicate there was no choice in the matter. As they moved toward the door, Eleanor caught a glimpse of luminescence. One last time. "So, you know," she said quietly, Holden himself came from a small town in Michigan. His first sketches were done on butcher paper. "Fascinating," Preston replied flatly, opening the door to usher her out. "Enjoy the rest of your afternoon." Standing on the sidewalk, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: the sting of humiliation. She had saved for months for this trip, studied Holden's work for years, only to be dismissed because she didn't fit the gallery's preferred image. As a taxi splashed through a puddle nearby, Eleanor realized her hands were shaking. Not with age, but with a quiet, dignified anger that would have surprised anyone who thought her just a simple old woman. Michael Williams stared at his mother's face on the video call, immediately sensing something was wrong. Despite the successful business trip to Silicon Valley, securing a $50 million investment for his educational technology startup, his satisfaction evaporated seeing Eleanor's forced smile. "Mom, what happened?" he asked, setting down his coffee in the sleek hotel suite. At 45, Michael had inherited his mother's observant eyes and his father's direct manner. "Nothing to worry about," Eleanor dismissed, adjusting her reading glasses. "Tell me about your meetings. Did they like your presentation on making art education more accessible?" Michael leaned closer to the screen. "They loved it, but you're changing the subject. How was the Holden exhibition?" A brief shadow crossed Eleanor's face. The artwork was magnificent. His late period pieces especially. "Mom," Michael interrupted gently, "did something happen at the gallery?" Eleanor sighed, her shoulders dropping slightly. "It's silly, really. I was asked to leave. Apparently, I wasn't the right type of visitor they wanted during their donor reception." As Eleanor recounted the incident, Michael's expression darkened. He recognized the careful way his mother downplayed the humiliation, the same way she'd navigated life's disappointments while raising him alone after his father's early death. Stretching her teacher's salary to fund his college education, they escorted you out because of how you were dressed. Michael's voice remained measured, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter, Michael. The art was beautiful for the time I saw it. It matters, Mom. You taught art for 40 years. You've forgotten more about Holden than that gallery assistant will ever know." Eleanor smiled sadly. "That's the world we live in, sometimes. Appearances matter in certain circles. After ending the call with assurances he'd see her when she returned home, Michael sat in silence, staring at the San Francisco skyline. His thoughts drifted to his childhood, his mother surrounding their modest home with books on the great masters, taking him to every museum within driving distance, working summer jobs to pay for his first computer. He opened his laptop and began researching the Cavendish Gallery. Founded by Victoria Cavendish, heiress to a banking fortune, it had become one of New York's most exclusive art spaces. Its annual gala attracted celebrities and billionaires, with tickets starting at $25,000. Michael's company had recently gone public, transforming him overnight from a hard-working entrepreneur to someone worth nearly $1 billion on paper. He had kept a low profile, uncomfortable with the attention wealth brought. But now, he felt a familiar determination, the same drive that had carried him from a scholarship student to a successful founder. He made 3 phone calls, one to his assistant to clear his schedule for the next week, one to his friend Rebecca, a prominent art critic, and one to his attorney. "I'm not interested in revenge," he told his attorney. "I'm interested in meaningful change." When he hung up, Michael looked at the family photo on his nightstand, his mother standing proudly between him and his father at his college graduation. She had taught him that art belonged to everyone, that beauty wasn't exclusive to the wealthy. "Time for a lesson in accessibility," he murmured, booking a flight to New York. The Manhattan autumn rain tapped against the windows of the Whitfield Hotel's restaurant as Michael sat across from Rebecca Chen, art critic for the New York Times. Their friendship dated back to graduate school, long before either had achieved professional success. "Let me get this straight," Rebecca said, setting down her espresso. "Your mother, the woman who could identify a Monet from across a football field, was escorted out of the Cavendish because she didn't look the part." Michael nodded, his calm demeanor belying his determination. "They judged the book by its cover. Badly." Rebecca leaned back, her critical eye, the same one that had built her reputation in the art world, assessing the situation. "Victoria Cavendish has cultivated that gallery as a status symbol, not just an art space. The exhibitions are excellent, but the environment is curated for a certain demographic. That's precisely the problem," Michael replied. "Art shouldn't be accessible only to those who can afford designer clothes or $25,000 gala tickets." Rebecca smiled. "So, what's your plan?" "Buy the gallery and fire everyone. Nothing so dramatic. I want to change the culture, not destroy it." Michael opened his tablet, revealing a document titled Holden Initiative. "I've been working on this since my company went public. Mom's experience just accelerated my timeline." As he outlined his strategy, Rebecca's expression shifted from skepticism to intrigue. By the time he finished, she was nodding appreciatively. "It's ambitious," she admitted, "and exactly what the New York art scene needs. But Victoria won't make it easy." "I'm counting on that," Michael replied. The following day, Michael entered the law offices of Goldman, Previn, and Associates, where Victoria Cavendish sat with her legal team. At 68, Victoria maintained the imperious bearing of someone accustomed to influence. Her silver hair was impeccably styled, her Chanel suit immaculate. "Mr. Sir Williams," she began, "while I appreciate your concern for your mother's experience, I fail to see why it requires this level of attention." Michael smiled politely. "Ms. Cavendish, I'm not here about an isolated incident. I'm here to discuss a partnership opportunity." He slid a folder across the table. "While the Williams Foundation is prepared to establish a $20 million endowment for the Cavendish Gallery, with an additional $5 million annually for the next decade." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of her surprise. "That's substantial. And what would you expect in return for such generosity?" "3 things," Michael replied. "Sorry. First, the creation of the Holden Educational Initiative, providing access and programming for public school students across all 5 boroughs. Second, a revision of the gallery's visitor policies to ensure all paying guests receive equal treatment regardless of appearance or background. Third, the establishment of the Eleanor Williams Scholarship for aspiring art educators. Victoria studied him. And you could start your own gallery with this kind of investment. I'm not interested in competing, Ms. Cavendish. I'm interested in transformation. Your gallery has the prestige and the collection. What it lacks is accessibility. And if I decline? Michael closed his portfolio calmly. Then I'll direct the funding toward other institutions that share my mother's belief that art belongs to everyone. And, of course, Rebecca Chen is working on a feature about elitism in private galleries. I believe she's interviewing several former Cavendish employees. The mention of Rebecca's article wasn't a threat. It was simply information Victoria needed to make an informed decision. After a tense moment, Victoria signaled to her attorney, "Draw up preliminary terms. We'll need to discuss the implementation timeline." As the meeting concluded, Victoria regarded Michael with newfound respect. "You didn't mention you were on the acquisition team for the Harper collection." Michael looked surprised. "You follow tech acquisitions." Victoria smiled thinly. "I follow intelligent investments, Mr. Williams. It seems we may have misjudged more than your mother." Outside, Michael's assistant waited with an umbrella. "How did it go?" "Phase 1 complete," Michael replied. "Now comes the hard part, making sure this isn't just about money changing hands, but about changing perspectives." As they walked through the rain-washed streets, Michael thought about his mother's face when she'd described being escorted out. This wasn't about embarrassing Victoria Cavendish or punishing the gallery. It was about ensuring no one else's mother would be made to feel they didn't belong in a space dedicated to human creativity. 6 months later, Eleanor Williams stood nervously in the foyer of her Massachusetts home, adjusting the collar of her new blazer, a gift from Michael she had initially resisted. "It's just a gallery opening, Mom," Michael reassured her, checking his watch. "And technically, you're one of the guests of honor." Eleanor shook her head. "I still don't understand why you named a scholarship after me. I was just a public school art teacher." "Just is doing a lot of work in that sentence," Michael replied with a smile. "Come on, our flight leaves in 2 hours." The transformation of the Cavendish Gallery had not been without challenges. Victoria had initially approached the changes as a transactional necessity, the price of Michael's endowment. But as the programs took shape, something unexpected happened. Victoria herself began to evolve. It started during the first planning meeting for the educational initiative. Eleanor, invited by Michael to provide her expertise, had quietly suggested modifications to make the programs more effective for students with limited art background. "Mrs. Williams," Victoria had said, with thinly veiled condescension, "while your experience with public education is quainty, we maintain certain standards of excellence." Eleanor had smiled politely. "Excellence and accessibility aren't mutually exclusive, Miss Cavendish." Richard Holden himself credited his high school art teacher, Mrs. Grunwald, with saving his life. "I believe you have 3 of her students' early works in your collection." Victoria's surprise had been evident, and it was the first crack in her armor. Now, as their car pulled up to the gallery, Eleanor gasped softly. The Cavendish's glass facade was illuminated for the evening event, but the banner stretching across it was what caught her attention. The Eleanor Williams Scholarship Fund and Holden Educational Initiative, making art accessible to all. "Michael," she whispered, "you didn't tell me they were naming the whole program after me, too." He squeezed her hand. "That was Victoria's idea, actually." Inside, the gallery had been transformed. The same exquisite art hung on the walls, but the space felt different. Students from public high schools across the city mingled with wealthy patrons and art world elites. Young docents, scholarship recipients, led tours, explaining the works with passion and knowledge. Preston, the gallery assistant who had escorted Eleanor out 6 months earlier, approached with a tray of champagne. He didn't recognize her at first, offering a professional smile. "Mrs. Williams," Victoria called, approaching with surprising warmth. "Our guest of honor has arrived." Preston's eyes widened in recognition, a flush spreading across his face. "Preston, isn't it?" Eleanor said kindly. "Thank you for the champagne. I believe you've met my son, Michael." Yes, that is," Preston stammered. Michael extended his hand. "Preston has been instrumental in coordinating the student tours," he said smoothly. "He's shown quite a talent for education." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Initially, I had my doubts about having teenagers in the gallery, but Preston convinced me their perspective brings something valuable to our conversations about art." Eleanor caught the young man's eye and saw something there. Not embarrassment, but genuine growth. He had been given the opportunity to expand beyond his previous limitations, just as the gallery itself had. Later, as Victoria introduced Eleanor to the gathered crowd, she spoke with unexpected emotion. "6 months ago, a simple misunderstanding. No, let me be honest. A failure of vision on my part nearly cost this gallery the opportunity to evolve." Eleanor Williams reminded us that art doesn't belong behind velvet ropes. It belongs wherever there are eyes to see it, hearts to feel it, and minds to be transformed by it. As applause filled the room, Eleanor scanned the faces surrounding her. Students whose lives would be changed by exposure to art, teachers who would receive support for their work, and gallery staff learning that exclusivity and excellence weren't synonymous. In that moment, standing beside her son, Eleanor realized that this transformation wasn't just about making people regret how they had treated her. It was about creating something far more meaningful from that moment of humiliation, a legacy that would open doors long after she was gone. 1 year later, Eleanor sat on a comfortable bench in the central hall of the Cavendish Gallery, watching a group of high school students sketch in front of Holden's Luminescence. The same painting she had been admiring when asked to leave now served as inspiration for young artists from across the city. The gallery had changed in subtle but significant ways. The lighting was warmer, the seating more plentiful. Staff members were trained to engage with visitors of all backgrounds, and a rotation of community docents brought diverse perspectives to the art on display. "Mrs. Williams," a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Zoe, one of the first Eleanor Williams Scholarship recipients. At 17, she reminded Eleanor of herself at that age, hungry for beauty, determined to create. "The new school accepted me," Zoe announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "CD full scholarship for their art education program." Eleanor beamed, taking the girl's hand. "You earned it. Your portfolio was exceptional." "I keep thinking," Zoe said, glancing around the gallery, "if this program hadn't existed, I might never have found my way here. Art would have remained something I saw in textbooks, not something I could create." Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. That's how transformation works. One person, one opportunity at a time. Across the room, Michael was deep in conversation with Victoria. Their initial antagonism had evolved into a respectful partnership. Victoria's business acumen and Michael's vision for accessibility complemented each other in unexpected ways. The Cavendish was now the model for a new kind of gallery, one that maintained artistic excellence while democratizing access. "So, a mother," Michael called, walking over with Victoria. "We've been discussing the expansion to Brooklyn. Victoria thinks you should head the advisory committee." Eleanor laughed. "At my age, surely there are more qualified people." Victoria shook her head firmly. None with your perspective. The satellite location will focus primarily on art education in communities with limited access. Your experience is invaluable. As they discuss the details, Eleanor noticed Preston leading a tour for seniors from a community center. He caught her eye and nodded respectfully, having found his own passion in making art accessible to others. Later, as Eleanor and Michael walked through Central Park, golden autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet, she paused to take in the scene. Children playing, couples strolling, artists sketching the changing landscape. You know, she said thoughtfully, when I was escorted out that day, I felt invisible. Like my lifetime of loving art counted for nothing because I didn't look the part. Michael listened, giving her the space to reflect. But now I realize that moment was necessary, she continued. Without it, the scholarship wouldn't exist. Those students wouldn't be in the gallery today. Sometimes humiliation is just the beginning of something beautiful. Michael put his arm around his mother's shoulders. You taught me that. Finding the beauty in difficult moments? It's what made me successful. Eleanor smiled up at her son. I'm proud of how you handled it, you know. You could have been vindictive. You could have bought the gallery and fired everyone. Michael laughed. I considered it for about 5 minutes. But then I heard your voice in my head, telling me what you always said about your most difficult students. Eleanor nodded, remembering. They're not challenging because they want to fail. They're challenging because they haven't yet learned how to succeed. As they continued their walk, Eleanor thought about the ripples spreading outward from that single moment of exclusion. Scholarships awarded, perspectives changed, lives redirected. What had begun as an act of rejection had transformed into a legacy of inclusion that would outlive them all. In the distance, the New York skyline gleamed in the autumn sun, a fitting backdrop to this new chapter, not an ending, but a beginning built on the foundation of a simple truth: that art, like compassion, belongs to everyone willing to open their hearts to its power.